Okay then, so good morning everybody. Thank you all for joining today. My name's Joe Carruthers. I'm the lead for the university's commercialisation journey. And I'm going to be joined today by Rick Smith from the School of Electrical and Electronic Engineering, who's has recently been on the commercialisation journey and has just founded his own company. So he's going to talk a little bit about his personal experiences. But for the first 20 or 25 minutes or so, I'd just like to talk about the journey more generally. And I guess from my side, there are really two objectives for today's session. First of all, it's really just to raise awareness about the commercialisation journey and the support that it can provide, and to encourage you to come forward if any of this seems interesting or relevant to you. But then secondly, and I think particularly in terms of this group, it's to highlight the role the commercialisation journey can actually play in shaping your career. Whether that's through the personal or professional development opportunities that it provides as part of the support package, or more extensively, perhaps leading you to join a spin-out company of some sort. I'll just say morning to Lucy. I kick things off. I didn't know if you're joining or not, so hopefully that's okay. I have started the recording, so we'll press on. So in terms of the commercialisation journey, it is a package of support that the university provides to help researchers explore the commercial potential of their idea. And to start with, then, it's worth thinking about what we mean by commercialisation, or whether something might be commercially successful. And this is the model that we usually use, which I think describes it quite nicely at a high level. If an idea is to be commercially successful, then it must usually tick the three boxes you can see on the slide there. So first of all, it has to work, and I guess that's pretty obvious, but it has to work in the way that a potential customer would want it to work. It's not just enough that it happens to be clever or ingenious. It has to serve a useful purpose. That leads you on to the second element. It has to be something that people want, that people will pay money for. And for that to happen, it usually has to be solving some sort of problem for them, or it has to be creating a new opportunity for them. And admit that person, I guess. And then thirdly, it has to, in some way, support a sustainable business. In other words, there needs to be a viable business model underpinning it. So in many ways, you can think of the commercialisation journey as a mechanism for exploring that particular space. So when a new opportunity comes forward, it usually is already working to some extent or another. People have demonstrated through their research activities that the basic concept is feasible, but perhaps what they're less certain about is who the potential customers might be, what the market opportunity might be, and certainly they probably don't have a well-developed idea of what the business plan might be. So as people go through the commercialisation journey, the aim is to try and balance those three aspects and to make sure that what it is they have is well directed at a target customer base, and that ultimately it can support a sustainable business. And we hopefully end up in that sweet spot in the middle of the Venn diagram. The other thing I'd like to flag before we get into the details of the journey is that we relaunched the commercialisation journey 2 years ago, and we've decided to take a very different approach to most universities when it comes to commercialisation. So the traditional university commercialisation model is to have something which is usually called a technology transfer office. And that is a team of people who sort of scout the university for promising ideas, and then it's really the technology transfer office which then do the commercialization. So they do the market exploration. They will often hire in external people to go off and run any company that comes out of it. It's often the case that the actual people who've come up with the idea are not necessarily particularly involved in the commercialization aspect. Now, we've decided at Sheffield to take a very different approach and to put the people who've come up with the innovation, the idea, the invention, whatever it might be, to put them at the heart of the process. And it's our role in the commercialization team to support them as they go through that commercialization process. So, as I say, we're really there to help those people make good decisions. And we think that we like this model because, we think it removes friction and barriers between, the university and the innovators in terms of the commercialization, but it also means that people can progress through the journey at their own pace. We are very conscious that, anybody who's doing commercialization is probably doing it alongside their sort of regular day job. And by putting the innovators at the heart of the process and putting them in control, they can move through the journey at their own pace. They're free to stop, to pause, to restart at any point. And there's no obligation at any point to necessarily continue or to move and achieve certain targets by a certain date. The innovators are in control at every point of the process, and we find that's a sort of a more approachable, a more supportive, and we're now starting to see that it's also working. In that we're expecting, probably somewhere between 5 and 10 new spinouts or licenses to come out of the university this year using this approach. So let's look at the journey in more detail then. And typically what we're working towards are, and when we're talking about a commercial outcome, it is usually the formation of some sort of startup business, sometimes a license to a third party, and less usually an outright sale of the technology to a third party. But most typically, we're working towards either what we call a spin-out or a license. So a spin-out is basically a new company which the university sets up to exploit the intellectual property that underpins that company. And what we encourage the people who are involved in the development of that IP to do is to take an active role in that new company on a sort of day-to-day basis. So that might mean joining the new company on either a full-time or sometimes a part-time basis, and to recognize, that there's an element of risk in that for the individuals involved, but also to reward and incentivize them for taking that step. We will normally assign a shareholding to those people who join the spin-out, and they're called founders in the company, essentially. And typically, they will, between them, receive the majority of the shares. So, typically 90% of the shares in the new company will be owned between those founding members, with the university taking just 10%. Whether people join the company or not is entirely optional. That's not for everyone. Some people will want to stay within the university, and that's fine. And although they won't receive any founding equity in the new business, they will receive a share of any royalties that come in from the licensing of the intellectual property that they might be reasonably entitled to as being inventors. The other common route is a license. So rather than set up a new company, instead we license the technology to an existing third-party player. So that might be somebody who's already in the market and is in a very good position to take the idea forward. In that case, the licensee will pay royalty fees to the university, and then again, the university will typically share those royalty revenues with the inventors who develop the intellectual property in the first place. I should have said at the beginning, I'm very happy to answer questions as we go through. So if anybody does have anything, do put up your virtual Google hand and we'll deal with those as they crop up. So why might you want to do this? So, there are clear opportunities for financial benefit here. I think in many cases we see that that's not the primary driver for why people are interested in commercializing their ideas. I think more commonly it's a desire to see them sort of progress beyond the four walls of the university and be put to good use within the wider world. So I think you can see that commercialization is a very clear route for knowledge exchange. It's a way of getting the university's intellectual property out into the wider world. And similarly, it's a very clear way of creating impact. If you set up a new startup, you'll be creating jobs. You'll hopefully be attracting investment into the city and the region. And also you'll be putting your idea at the disposal of people who are going to benefit from it. So there's a great potential there for creating impact. In terms of the work itself, I think when you move beyond the traditional academic funding sources, into looking at commercialization, you'll open up other sources of finance to take your ideas forward. So that might be accelerator programs, or money coming from investors, or money coming from schemes which are typically only open to companies rather than universities. So as your idea becomes more mature and you need to leave the academic funding sources behind, commercialization is a great way of finding those other sources of support. And it's also great for building your networks. I don't particularly like the phrase, but people talk about commercialization as being a contact sport, and it really is about going out and talking to as many people as you possibly can, particularly outside of the university. So it can be a really good way of building up both your technical and professional networks within your area. So this is what the journey looks like. So when we relaunched it a couple of years ago, we took on board the feedback that, to many people looking in from the outside, commercialization all looked a little bit mysterious. So in other words, when people first came forward to us, they weren't quite sure what they were letting themselves in for. So what we've tried to do is to make the process much more transparent by putting a very clear 4-stage structure around it, so that at any given time, somebody knows where they are in the journey, what they've already done, what they need to do next, and how far they are away from the next gate or milestone. I should say that this isn't a pass-fail exercise. As part of the journey philosophy, we will never tell somebody that they must stop or they must continue. Again, this is always in your hands, and nor is this a process that you sort of mechanically follow and get a nice outcome at the end. All this structure really does is provide a roadmap for you to follow from the point where you might first get in contact with us to whichever stage you decide to continue to. So all new opportunities come into stage 1 that we call understand. And that is very much about, first of all, giving people a flavor of what commercialization is all about to see whether it's something that they want to continue with. But it's also about making sure there are no obvious showstoppers. So we will do an in-depth check around the intellectual property at that point, for example, just to make sure that we understand that that's all okay, and there's nothing that we need to address from that perspective. But it's really just a high-level look at what the idea is, how it might create value for any potential customers, what competitors are there at the moment. It's quite light touch. The idea is that it takes no more than 3 months with people doing this alongside their regular job. And at the end, we just invite people to give a 15-minute summary presentation of what they learned. We're not making any decisions at stage 1. We're not making any commitments. We're just, getting a feel for what it is we have and whether it might be worth continuing to pursue. That leads us into stage 2, which is really the heart of the process. We call it explore. And this is where we do what's called the market discovery exercise, where we encourage people to go out and have as many conversations as they can with potential customers, competitors, suppliers, any stakeholders who they think might be relevant. And the idea is, this is where we're kind of following the spiral, if you like, that we saw on the earlier diagram. We are testing our assumptions, we're gathering evidence, and basically at the end of stage 2, you will have a high-level business model which describes, what your commercialization plan is. So who your customers are, what kind of relationships you want to build with them, how you're going to make money, and then also, how you're going to deliver that value to your customers. Is it a spin out? Is it a license? If it's a spin out, what kind of resources does it need, and so on and so forth. At that point, really have quite a clear idea of where this is going. And so stage 3 is really about layering on the detail to work up a detailed, investable, if that's the way you're going to go, business plan. And then stage 4 is really just about the legalities of incorporating the business and completing all of the legal documents. In terms of timeframes for this, it varies enormously. I would say typically from the first approach at the beginning of stage 1 to the end of stage 4, we regularly see opportunities go through this process in 18 to 24 months. And again, that's doing this sort of alongside their regular job at the university. Clearly, though, it can be quicker than that, and it can also be much longer. I think we see particularly with the Faculty of Health, where you might be on an extended regulatory pathway, it can take considerably longer than that. But we hope all of that flexibility is built in. Regardless of how quickly you're moving through the commercialization journey, at any given point, you should have a pretty good idea of where you are and what you should be thinking about doing next. So all of that comes with a nice package of support. So every opportunity will be paired up with a member of the commercialization team who will be their single point of contact all the way through the process. Again, that's quite unusual in terms of university commercialization. Normally, as you move from one stage to the next, you'll be handed over to a different member of the team, but here you will have the same point of contact who will see you all the way through the journey. We have some quite nice tools for things like intellectual property landscaping and market discovery, which we can give you access to. We also have our own commercialization budget, the so-called IPDAC fund, and that's a very flexible pot of money which can really be used to unblock any aspect of commercialization. So there's not any sort of stringent requirements about what it can or can't be used for. It's deployed on an as-needed basis, and particularly where you need to do things which perhaps fall outside of the remit of your research grant funding, for example. All 4 stages now from 1 to 4 come with a package of training. So there's typically a series of training modules within each stage that you will run through with either your commercialization manager or sometimes within a cohort of other opportunities at a similar stage. And next year, we'll also be looking at how we can get some of this training onto My Development as well, so people can access that on an even more flexible basis. And then, as we've talked about, if we make it all the way through to the end of the journey, then we have sector-leading terms when it comes to the generosity of the shareholding and the license revenues. Now, again, I think for transparency, I should point out that the journey that we see here is very much a funnel. So typically each year we get somewhere between about 70 and 90 new opportunities come forward, and we'll go into stage 1. And each year we'll maybe get somewhere between 5 and 10 new spinouts or licenses coming out of stage 4. So it's very much a funnel. Most people won't make it all the way through, but we do believe very strongly that even if you don't ultimately end up creating a spin-out or concluding a license agreement, you will get some benefit in terms of personal and professional development in just going through some of the activities in the journey for however long you decide to stick with it. So I think by going out and understanding the potential applications and uses of your ideas and your research, you'll have better context, for example, the next time you come to write a research proposal. As part of that market discovery, you might identify new strands of research, new problems to solve, new potential applications for your idea which you hadn't previously thought about. It's a great way of checking your intellectual property, and seeing if there is some commercial value there, and doing something about it before you decide to publish it and sort of lose the right to protect it. And as we've mentioned, it's a great way of building your network, both within and outside of the university. What we don't want commercialization to be is a lonely process. That's when it really doesn't work well. It's much better done, as a team within a community, and that's something that we encourage. Something else we've been, pushing more and more recently is encouraging researchers when they're putting together a new grant proposal or a new project to actually consider building a commercialization element into it. Now, we sometimes see that that's already done. It's not always done, I would suggest, in the right way. You often see commercialization as something which is done at the end of the project. It ends up being work package 9 or task 10 in the final 3 months of the project, and that's really too late. So we would encourage you to do that. We've talked to the funding bodies, and they're generally supportive of opportunities doing that. But if you are going to do it, do it well. So make sure that you create time and resources for it within your project plan and within your budget. Try to have it as a strand all the way through, so you can actually use some of the commercialization information that you're gathering to actually help shape the direction of the project. If you're working with industrial partners as collaborators, really leverage their input. They're the people who are closest to your customers and can provide some really good quality information. And as I say, try to have it something which is not just tacked on at the end of the project, but embedded throughout it, because particularly, if you're on a fixed term contract, we see a lot of point of failure of commercialization of people contract ending, and they've made a good start on the commercialization, but their contract ends and it becomes difficult to continue. So really, the earlier you can start commercialization, within a new contract, the more options you're going to leave open for yourself as the project gets towards the end. If you need any support in embedding, a commercialization strand into any of your proposals, then very happy for you to come forward and speak to the commercialization team, and they can give you some pointers as to how to do that, and even help you out with some text for the relevant sections of the proposal. And this is probably a quick point, a good point to have a quick word about IP. Intellectual property is the fundamental bedrock of any university spin-out or license. It's the thing which underpins it, and it's the thing which differentiates it from any competitor in the market that it's going into. So this is something that we do right at the beginning of the commercialization process in stage 1, and we'll revisit all the way through. And there's a few things we need to make sure with the IP. First of all, we need to make sure that we have freedom to operate. In other words, we're not infringing anyone else's existing IP. This is why we do the patent landscaping, to make sure there's not an obscure patent somewhere which actually already describes your idea. We also just need to do a check as to whether any of the IP has already been disclosed. We're realistic that that's always a likelihood in a university, where researchers are encouraged to publish their work, to go out and speak at conferences, and so on and so forth. It's not necessarily a showstopper if some of the IP has already been disclosed, but obviously, it's better if it hasn't, because that allows us to make sure that we can formally protect it, through a patent or a registered design, or through copyright, or whatever formal legal mechanism, in order to make sure it's suitably protected. Just bear that in mind. If you think you've got something which is commercially interesting and you think you might want to publish it or present it, it's worth coming to speak to the commercialization team first of all, so we can take a look at that and see whether there's any protection that we could or should be putting in place before you go ahead and talk about it to a wider public audience. I guess as we've gone through this presentation today, you start to appreciate that commercialization is something which very much extends beyond the university, and of course the immediate environment beyond the university is the city of Sheffield, and that's very much part of our mission, is to not only encourage new businesses to form, but we want those businesses to stay in the city of Sheffield. So there are a lot of initiatives going on at the moment to try and support that. There's a project called the Sheffield Spine that you may have heard about, which is looking to build a sort of innovation district within the city. But basically, we're working to develop good quality incubation space for our spinouts to move into. And it's really pleasing that we're now starting to see, clusters of university spinouts getting together in places such as Sheffield Technology Parks, down towards the station, and the refurbished Pennine 5 building just down the road. And there's plenty of space for people to move into. And it's not just the university, that the wider city itself and the South Yorkshire region are seeing University of Sheffield spinouts as a key growth driver for the local economy. And then just to finish off, a word about investment. So certainly for spinouts, one of the ways in which those spinouts are often financed are through investors. We're very lucky at the City of Sheffield, at the University of Sheffield, to have our own friendly investor, Northern Gritstone. This was an investment company that we set up together with the universities of Leeds and Manchester a few years ago. And they're more than just another investor, if you like. They are on campus every week. They're very happy to meet with opportunities, to discuss with them, to support them. Whether or not Northern Gritstone end up investing in them, they're still very happy to talk to opportunities and to give them feedback and the benefit of their advice. In many cases, they may not be the most appropriate investor for a given opportunity, but as I say, they are a key partner through the commercialization journey, and they're very easy to access and very happy to go and have a coffee with anybody if they want an independent check or chat about anything. I'm going to stop there. I guess the call to action is, to encourage you to come and talk to us if anything that I've talked about today sounds interesting. As I say, our door is always open. There are no obligations or expectations from our side. And as I say, all of the things on the slide there, whether it's just, basic IP inquiries, how you might, include commercialization elements in some of your ongoing research, or whether you're actually interested in exploring the commercial potential of your idea, do feel free to reach out. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Rick. Rick has recently incorporated his business following the commercialization journey path, and he's just going to talk a little bit about the experience of founding a company along with another member of his research team. So Rick, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Joe. Right, let me see if I can take over the presentation. Okay. Okay, great. Thanks, Joe. So I'm going to try and not take up too much time. A nice picture of myself there. Joe's given me the chance to be self-indulgent and talk about myself for a few minutes. So I am interested by this opportunity to talk about my commercialization journey to the established career forum, because I think there are some kind of concerns and thoughts that people established in an academic career are probably having about joining this. Does it mean that you have to go down a particular route? Does it mean that you're closing doors to further academic career progression later on? So I'm going to start off by talking a bit about my journey and my company, and then I'll leave plenty of space at the end for some questions to Joe and myself. So I'm currently a senior lecturer in the School of EEE, so working in the Semiconductor Materials and Devices group and researching in the area of LED materials, novel fabrication approaches, and in particular heterogeneous integration approaches over the last few years, so how we bring different materials together. And I started a project, an EPSIC-funded project, which was an adventurous manufacturing call to look at new ways of bringing different semiconductor devices together and try and scale this up, because I had this idea that there was an industry need to move from small scale lab approaches or small wafer scale to something larger. So go from semiconductor scale to larger applications. And it was just an idea at that point. I hadn't engaged in the commercialization process at that point. I was aware that there was a need, but I didn't have a detailed understanding. So as I progressed through that EPSERC project, I got in touch with Joe. I think I had a look through the emails last night, and it was, I think, the tail end of 2022 when we first got in touch. And I got in touch with Joe regarding another bit of IP, actually. So this was IP focused on micro LEDs, which is the focus of Pixel Flo as well, but a different approach to micro LED manufacturing. And this was tied into, at that time, a KE project. So I had a knowledge exchange project to explore the commercial potential of a micro LED transfer printing approach that was interest to kind of near eye display. So we're talking about AR, VR applications here. So that was kind of focused around the idea that this would be a licensable technology. And I started that, I think, I can't remember, Joel will be able to tell me which cohort I was in, but quite early on, after the commercialization journey had changed into this new format. I think I was possibly the second cohort on the stage 1. So I started on this program, and as I say, this was around some other IP. But what happened as part of this process is I had another bit of IP. I described this adventurous manufacturing grant in the background that was less well developed, but had this kind of quite a different potential, more of a potential to be spun out as a spin-out company. I had originally thought that this would be something I'd look at a few years down the line, once I'd got some more EPSERC money to pad this out. But through this kind of the first stage, trying to establish what we really had there, it turned out that this looked like a great opportunity. There was a fantastic market there. It was really well defined. It lent itself so well to a spin-out company model, and in that, I mean, it was something that could scale very well and would be appealing to investors. And Joe mentioned Northern Gritstone. I'll get on to them later on. So I kind of switched the focus there. So we still have the other IP going through a parallel process, but we started to look into the idea of founding a spin-out company based on this large-scale manufacturing approach. Joe mentioned IPDAC, so I used some of these IPDAC funds to do some market discovery. So that sent me off to Silicon Valley to speak to display manufacturers to understand some of these challenges. And I think this is a really important point. People will say a lot that in the commercialization process, you've got to be prepared for people to tell you that your baby is ugly. And we spend years building up a research team and research expertise, and you become an expert in a field. But when you're dealing with the outside world with commercial interests, there are very different and not necessarily easily publicly accessible drivers behind certain elements of technology adoption. So it's very easy for your assumptions to be tested and pulled apart at that point. And I think one of the things I've really learned is how important it is to be able to let go of bits of the IP that don't work and welcome in bits that match the market. And I've had some really positive feedback about that. You can't go into this with a kind of a stereotypically rigid academic approach to your research being built on 5 years of lab work. Well, this is obviously the best approach here. So that market discovery was really critical. We also use that funds to appoint a business advisor. So we started with myself and a postdoc, co-inventors of the IP, but we didn't have this commercial experience. So we brought in someone that had a significant amount of experience. We interviewed a few different people, found someone that was a great complement and had the potential to go on to be a bigger part of the business. We brought him in. He became eventually a co-founder in the spin-out, actually. And then following on from that, as we developed through the commercialization journey, we were accepted on Northern Gritstone's NG Studios Accelerator program. So this is a great program. There have been several companies that have gone through this process. We're the third cohort so far. And I know there's a life sciences accelerator that they're going to be starting this year, I think. So great opportunity because they get you on a fantastic program. They put some money into the business directly and get you into their network of experts. And then in July, we're going to be pitching to their investor network. So I think there's more than 500 investors going to be there in Manchester. Great opportunity for us to really accelerate and turn this started as an idea a couple of years ago at stage one into a business that will be able to leave the university and start employing people, make an impact, as Joe said, throughout Sheffield. So for myself, I think I had some concerns about starting that commercialization journey. You know, you spend years building up building up a lab and thinking about continuity of grants, PhD studentships, keeping that momentum. And I think that the great thing that Joe and the team have put together is there are lots of different ways to engage with this process. So it doesn't have to be all in. You know, you can go through this commercialization journey, as Joe said, remaining an academic, maybe an advisor for a spin out, maybe the process could be licensed. You can leave entirely or do anything in between. There are lots of different routes there. And there's an impact pathway, an innovation pathway established now in the university. So there are ways of doing this that will still be rewarded in ACP. And you know, you won't be hamstrung by the fact that you've not, or you shouldn't be hamstrung by the fact that you've not applied for grants with R&C for a year or so when you've been focused on these commercialization activities. There are other routes to reward here if that's one of the concerns. So we've established Pixel Flo. We spun out in April this year. We just started on that accelerator program. We launched formally at Display Week in San Jose, so it's middle of Silicon Valley, back in May this year. And we had some great opportunity to speak to the market. And it's been a really incredibly exciting opportunity so far. We've engaged with all of the big display panel manufacturers, met some really interesting people along the way. And it's been a very different experience to my academic career. So things that I wouldn't have imagined myself doing 5 years ago have suddenly opened up as an everyday occurrence now. So what do I wish I'd known earlier? As I say, there's a wide range of different opportunities here, and they can be career enhancing. You know, it doesn't have to be a complete change in career, and it can be. And for me, that's likely the case, the way that this is going. So I'm currently looking at transitioning out to run Pixel Flo full time. So as CEO of Pixel Flo and leaving my academic post behind. Now there are opportunities to do that all in, as it were, and there are opportunities to do that through secondment, where you leave for a couple of years and your post is held open. There are other routes to leave to go part-time or to act as in an advisory role. And there are great examples. I'm sure if you're interested in this, if you start the process, Joe will help you, or the team will help you kind of see what those opportunities are. So don't go into it thinking that you have to go all in on this. It's a great way to explore. As I say, I didn't go into this thinking I would, in 3 years' time, be leaving the university and running a spin-out company as CEO. There are lots of other ways to do it. You might discover quite a lot about yourself by going through the process. And there are routes now, as I say, this innovation impact pathway is a great way to still get recognition for this. And there are other examples of recent spin-outs where there are, people are looking at maybe 50-50 splits or other splits of the time. And there are ways of dealing with PGRs and grant pipelines as well. So it's not that your lab has to stop while you're focused on this. Commercialization is not a dirty word. Okay, it's a bit of a cliche, but it's easy to get siloed into general metrics and seeing the purity of certain aspects of research. But I mean, I've written Pathways to Impact, and I have to say the most impact we've generated, and we're on the route to generating way more impact through this route than we ever did by one of those Pathways to Impact in a previous EPTIC grant. It's a really great way to get out there and engage with the outside world. think about your team early on. I started with myself and a postdoc as co-inventors, and as I say, we used these IPDAT funds to bring in a business advisor. Investors, if you're going to go down the spin-out route with investors, will almost never invest now in a single founder. You know, they want to invest in teams of people, and the team alongside the IP is one of the most important aspects of any spin-out prospect. That's not to say that you have to have the team in place, but thinking about how you could build that team, which the commercialization journey will help you do, is a really important thing to do. I wish I'd engaged with my school or department, as it was at that point, a little bit earlier on, because the transition for me, you know, there's a lot of negotiation and discussions to be had about how, in this case now, I plan to eventually leave the university to run the spin out. But if I'd been going down another route and staying, it'd be really useful to talk to your you know, your school impact champion or director of research or whoever it is that you have that can be aware of this. They'll almost certainly have a pipeline, an impact pipeline that if you're engaged with, it's much easier to have those discussions in advance. And as I say, you might discover a lot more about yourself than you thought you would in going through this process. As I say, I never expected that in a few years' time I'd be a CEO of a spin-out company and I'd be going down this route, but it has been incredibly rewarding. It's a really exciting journey, very, very different to the stuff that I've been doing for years in the university. So I am going to avoid giving you my Pixel Flo pitch. I'm going to flick through and say Pixel Flo are a micro LED display manufacturing company. So we identified a problem in the display industry very, very briefly. Next generation displays are going to be micro LED displays made from high efficiency inorganic LEDs. We identified this huge market. So it's $160 billion a year market for the display industry across all of these different segments, where micro LED as an emerging technology wins in all of these segments. We have this really well-defined problem where it's the semiconductor industry making LEDs. You've got to get those LEDs and take them from those wafers and precisely package them, position them across a large area display. So an 8K TV is 100 million individual devices that are a fraction of the size of a human hair that needs to be positioned. Right? This is a real hard manufacturing problem, and it's a real bottleneck. It's really well defined, and this is the kind of thing we talk about when people say words like market pull. We have a real market need here to solve this problem, and that's the problem that we solve by our continuous flow mass transfer problem, technology that I'm not going to go through here, but it is a scalable approach to solve this problem that really importantly, we've refined this so that it precisely matches the needs of the industry. So it's not me trying to force an approach that I like the idea of. This is something that is designed to build on existing industry infrastructure. So I'll leave some space for questions. So commercialization journey, as I say, great way to explore new career opportunities here. Lots of potential routes. So don't worry about career impacts if you don't want to leave. Have the conversation, start on stage one. Very little time commitment for stage one, but a great way to explore. And then just do discuss with your school. As you get further onto the journey, make sure that you smooth those transitions later on. So thanks very much. I'll leave it there and open up for questions to Joe or myself. Thanks.
Thank you, Rick. That was great. Yeah, so open to any questions, and if anybody has to either to Rick or myself, yeah, do stick up your virtual hand. Anyone? Looks like we're okay for questions. Is there anything you want to tack on the end of that, Lucy? I'm not sure if you want to do a quick survey or something.
Yeah, I have got a little survey for the end. I just wanted to see if there were any questions, but thank you very much, Joe and Rick. That was really a really great talk, and I hope people found it really useful. Well, in case there are questions, while people are thinking of them, I'll pop the poll up now that I've got so that you can be doing that. 2 seconds. Okay, hopefully people can see a poll appear. If you wouldn't mind just filling that in. You've got a question.
Yeah, so the question from Jose is, what are the pros and cons of sort of a license versus a spin out for someone working at a university? So I think there are a couple of different perspectives on that. So there's the individual perspective. Okay, so you as an inventor, obviously, the idea of launching a spin out company, of moving from an academic career into more of a commercial one, for some people that'll be really appealing and exciting. To other people, really, it doesn't interest them at all. They would much rather stay at the university. So in that sense, a license is a great route to commercializing your IP whilst allowing you to stay at the university. In terms of workload as well, it's probably the slightly less arduous route. The whole process of simply setting up a spin out, is a project in itself, and with a license, you're licensing to an existing company, and they're doing a lot of the hard work, in terms of actually taking it to market. So I think there's a strong element of personal choice in there, and that's perhaps one of the biggest choices. I think there's also a commercial argument as well, though. At the end of the day, it's all about getting your technology to market, and I think you need to have a good honest think about, is the best way of getting my technology into the hands of people who can make use of it for me to set up a spin-out company, or for me to license it to an established player? And that will be very much judged on a case-by-case basis. That's something we will encourage you to explore during the stage 2 market discovery. I can imagine scenarios where actually licensing something to an established player who has the existing customer base, the existing supply chains, the existing profile, might be a shorter route to market. There'll be other opportunities where perhaps the technology is, just a little bit too early or a little bit too radical for somebody, for a more conservative player to invest in it, and is perhaps better suited to the spin-out route, or simply you want to keep ownership of your idea and take it forward that way. So it's a great question, and it's a very explicit question that we will help people to address during stage 2, based on a combination of commercial and personal perspectives.
Sorry, Joe, just to briefly add to that, from my own perspective, completely commercially driven. I mean, the opportunity that I did spin out was clearly a spin out only opportunity. There was no way that had the legs to be licensed directly. It would have to be through a spin out. It wouldn't have to be me leading a spin out. So we could have built a spin out, sent postdoc out, built a team around my postdoc, and I could have stayed with the university if I wanted to, but there was no license route there. And I think some opportunities will maybe be a little bit more mixed, but mine was very much a case of there was no direct license opportunity there. It kind of had to be a spin-out route for the development that needed to be done.
Yeah. Then we have a second question from Dennis about, again, this idea of the innovator-led approach versus the standard technology transfer office. So I'll say a bit, and then maybe Rick could add his perspective again. So you make the point there, Dennis, that it requires very self-motivated academics, and that's kind of the reason why we do it. Nobody will get through the commercialization journey unless they're motivated to do it. But what it means is that people who do get through it have got a fantastic chance of going on and making a success. So in that sense, we almost are making it self-selecting. It's not only about the idea, as Rick said, the key part of this is the team who are going to bring it forward, and the people who are going to be most passionate, the most motivated, the most ambitious people, we find, are the people who have come up with the idea in the first place and believe it, and have already invested maybe years of their career in taking that point. That's not to say, as we did with Rick, we can't supplement their team with more experienced people. But in terms of getting stuff done, the requirement for self-motivation and ambition on behalf of the team is actually a key ingredient, I think, of the commercialization journey process. Anything you would add around that, Rick?
Yeah, very, very much agree on that. I mean, it is a lot of work, and I think that the point is this is one of the things that you can discover as you go through the process. So for me, that was a discovery that I did have that motivation to take it forward. It was pushing buttons. It was exciting, and it was a brilliant opportunity at the right time. And it does need the work. I think you do. When you speak to investors, they want someone that is bought into the process. So it's not just that you can take this out of the university, it's you can take it out into the real world and lead it, or that the team that you build can do that. And I think if you just have a standard TTO route, it's difficult to get that kind of a level of ownership and ambition and drive. So the self-selection, yeah, for me, absolutely perfect. It uncovered in me a drive to build something, and it was a lot of work, and it continues to be a lot of work, but it's rewarding, and that's absolutely what's needed to be, I guess, to be successful. So yeah, very much agree with Joe on that.
Okay. So I think we're just about at time. Lucy, have you got everything you need from the survey point of view?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for filling in the survey at the end there. That's great.
And so, yeah, do get in touch if you're remotely interested. You'll find that we have lots of information on the university website. It's split rather awkwardly across the public and staff web pages. So there's different sets of information there. So do take a look at that. If you're interested in seeing what's going on, there is a Commercialisation Journey LinkedIn page. So, lots of activity from our spinouts and aspiring spinouts on that as well, to get a flavour of the kind of things that are going on. And I think we also find, lots of people who've been through the commercialisation journey are more than willing to go and have a coffee or a chat, with anybody who might be interested. Just so, if you want a second opinion, on the commercialisation journey, or you'd rather have that very informal chat with someone who's already been through it and get an open and honest perspective on that, then do reach out to those people as well. So thank you very much for joining today. I will stop the recording, and I guess Amy or Lucy will make that available to people. And yeah, hopefully we'll see some of you on the commercialisation journey in the future. Okay, thank you everyone.